"10,000 came last Sunday, but there's room for 1,000 still. All the moors are rare and bonny, and the heather sweet as wine, and the road across the hillside is the people's, yours and mine. So come, oh Sunday morning, for a walk o'er Winter Hill. 10,000 went last Sunday, but there's room for 1,000 still. Hey.
Adieu, dear comrade, your mission is fulfilled, but I, more warlike, myself and this contentious soul of mine, still on our own campaigning bound, through untried roads with ambushes, opponents lined, through many a sharp defeat and many a crisis, often baffled, here marching, ever marching on, a war fight out, here, to fiercer, weightier battles give expression.
The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my garb and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed, I am too untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me, which flings my likeness after the rest and true as any on the shadowed worlds. It coaxes me to the vapour and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fibre your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stopped somewhere, waiting for you.
Okay, so that was the first film, and I made 4 films, and Damian actually edited all of the films for me. So the next film I'm going to show is one of that series, and it was the one that I made for Peterborough. And I spent a lot of time at John Clare's cottage. I've done a lot of research on John Clare as well. I did a lot more research on him after I actually did the project as well, because I was supposed to do another project that didn't really fulfill itself in any way. But it was really interesting because they've got a massive archive of him at the Peterborough Museum in the library in the archive section there. And so the film is filmed at the cottage. It's also on the train journey that I was doing, also between when I left for Peterborough to also visit Gordon Boswell's Romany Museum, which is in near Spalding in Lincolnshire. So some of that's on there as well. And also it was filmed a lot at the Green Backyard, which is a community growing space in Peterborough that was established in about 2009, which is still managed to be there, but at different times it was a bit of land that was reclaimed and they were having issues with the council and stuff there. So again, this film was about connecting with other spaces where other people were trying to do things, as well as reclaim, as well as looking at the history. So I was really interested in John Clare because obviously the enclosures really affected him, and a lot of his work and writing was about that, and also because he was truly like a poet of the people. It was interesting because I've got one of the books here about him, and obviously going back in the history, in 1809 Parliament passed an act for enclosing lands in the parish of Maxey and Helpstone in the county of Northampton, and this had with the enclosure, the fence of ownership closed down the landscape and imposed a strictly economic ethic on the relationship between the villagers and the land. The commons, meaning both the commoners as opposed to the proprietors, and the common heathland were under threat. And I just feel that, as time's gone on, these things keep happening again and again and again. And I think what we're facing now is the same. It's another set of things to restrict that movement for everybody. And I think in the work I'm making, I'm interested in what apparently at some time seems to be affecting us as a community, but very often what that does, it ends up affecting many more people as well. So it's not just about us, it ends up being about everybody. So I'll just share that film, and then that'll be it from me once I've done this. Okay, thank you.
Deaine, is there uh, somewhere online where your work can be viewed?
Well, all the films are on Vimeo, so they're all
Oh,
on Vimeo, yeah. And you can, I have got a website as well, which is just my name. If you put in my name, Deaine Lebas, all is one word.com, and then that goes through to lots of my other work that I've done, because I do a lot of performative work as well. That is very much just me, just being out on the street, doing my thing. And you might just spot me with a camera doing quite a lot of guerrilla filming and things and stuff like that. And I'm making some more work at the moment. I don't know if it came up during when I was doing the thing, but I've been doing a bit of filming locally. I saw a massive sort of solidarity with Gypsy Roma and traveller signs for the anti-trespass thing. It was up on the hill near the racecourse at Brighton here. So I filmed that when I saw it up there. So I'm always looking for things that can tie in with my sort of ongoing archive, my ongoing work about this sort of thing. But so yeah, there's lots of places to see my stuff.
brilliant. I'll share that with people as well when I okay, thanks very much, Deaine, that was fabulous. Okay, so Mike Doherty is going to speak next. So Mike's the editor of Travellers Times, which is a print magazine and website based publication for and by UK's Gypsy, Roma and Travellers. He's had a long association with the Travellers Times, writing news and investigative features for the magazine and the website as a freelance writer, really. Mike's highly skilled professional journalist who also delivers media and communication skills training, and obviously is firmly rooted in the issues that, sorry, I'm just submitting someone, that in front of the GRT community. So Mike, over to you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yes, thank
Brilliant.
you.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look at this trespass law. this anti-trespass law that is part of the bill, and we are waiting for it to come in. It was announced, first of all, in the Conservative manifesto in 2019, and they were going to criminalise trespass, and then they were just going to criminalise trespass. We knew it was going to be aimed at gypsy and traveller communities, but first it was just about criminalising trespass, full stop. And that might be where the government will go if they get away with this. Now, before the Conservative manifesto, there were murmurings from MPs and councils and councillors and a few police services that this law needed to be brought in. It was called the Irish option, and it was definitely aimed at unauthorised camps by gypsy and traveller people. And it was cross-party. There were Labour MPs, there were Conservatives. First came into power, they were in a coalition with Liberal Democrats. So they got their wish, and the Conservatives won the election with a thumping majority. And we think that one of the reasons why they won it with a thumping majority was because, yet again, they used gypsies and travellers as a political football. And the consultation was put out, and we now have the bill. What the bill actually does, it criminalises trespass with vehicles, and one vehicle is enough, with the intent to reside, if the landowner or the senior police officer on the site believes that the travellers or whoever is trespassing with a vehicle with the intent to reside is causing distress and disturbance and damage, or is likely to cause distress and disturbance and damage. Now, the bill's actually quite a lot of the wording in it is pretty vague, and you're right to say that it could criminalize protest camps. I mean, if you're protesting against HS2 or your XR and you want to bring a boat into the middle of London, a boat that's painted pink or something like that, you're going to bring it in on a trailer with a vehicle. Now you could get caught by this new law just doing that. Like a gimmick like that could be caught by this new law, but it is mainly aimed at gypsy, Roma, traveller people. It started off with 2 vehicles. In the consultation, the government said it would be 2 vehicles that would trigger the law. It's now 1. It's shocking and almost unbelievable that the government has chosen the middle of the global pandemic and resulting economic crisis to announce that they are yet again going to kick gypsy and traveller people in the teeth. The new police and crime bill gives too much power to the police, and it will or could potentially wipe out the travelling nomadic way of life, which, as Deaine and as yourself said, has been in this country for centuries. While some gypsies and travellers travel during the spring and summer out of choice to look for work, to go to weddings, funerals, in big family groups and stuff like that, there are also many more who are fleeing overcrowded permanent sites where they have been doubled up during the winter in crowded conditions, and in the summer they need to get off. A lot of councils know that these sites are well overcrowded. The permanent legal sites are well overcrowded. They turn a blind eye because if they turf gypsies and travellers off, they then have to deal with unauthorised encampments. So in the summer, if you look at the caravan count of unauthorised camps, which the government publishes twice a year, in the summer there are loads more gypsies and travellers on the road. They're not not all of it is about choice. It's because they're coming off these permanent sites where they've been crammed up with their uncles and aunties and stuff like that. And in the summer, it's time to go. Gypsies and travellers' lives are hard enough as it is without yet another hammer blow from what is obviously a hostile government. When the Conservatives first took power in 2010, they made their anti-traveller intentions clear by bankrolling the massive Dow Farm traveller site eviction in Essex, immediately making hundreds of men, women and children homeless. Where are those people now? It's unlikely they are now living on permanent sites because the government has also passed laws making it even harder for gypsy and travellers people to develop their own permanent legal sites. Even the police don't want these new powers, with many believing that the solution to unauthorised camps is not the ramping up of enforcement, but to instead build more legal and safe transit, emergency and permanent sites. Yet councils across England consistently break the law and fail to plan for enough traveller pitches, meaning that thousands of gypsies and travellers are on waiting lists for authorised legal sites, chasing less than, at the current count, 100 vacant pitches. The laws will also affect new travellers and horse-drawn new travellers who have been quietly pursuing a nomadic way of life for decades. And what about the new van lifer community that's springing up around many English cities and which are an indictment of our broken housing system? The new van lifer phenomenon could be crushed in its infancy. Their vehicles, like those of gypsies and travellers on unauthorised camps, are their homes and will now be at the mercy of the whims and prejudice of local police services and councils. And some local police services and councils are more racist than others and more prejudiced than others. Where are they meant to go? Because if you're on one of those sites, if a police officer, the senior police officer, or the owner decides that you are likely to cause distress and disturbance, you are immediately causing a criminal act and you are liable for arrest unless you move immediately. And what's going to happen to the children of the people on those sites? I spoke to a lawyer recently, a traveller law expert, and he called it a chilling effect. It's people are just going to move. As soon as a police officer or a council worker says, I think you're going to cause distress and disturbance, you need to go home. They're not going to risk their children being taken into care. They're going to move. I mean, we dread to think what this summer in 2021 is going to bring. And we fear that set piece evictions of gypsy and traveller people living on unauthorised camps with press and politicians in tow and egged on by hostile police services and local councils will spark off across England this summer. And it is England. Scotland, it's not going to happen in Scotland. The law doesn't affect Scotland. Scotland is actually opening up old stopping places and talking to travellers and traveller representative groups to sort out solutions, and there are solutions. Wales has the Welsh government, the Welsh Assembly, is already threatening that we're not going to bring this law in. The law does affect Wales, but they're going to try. They've said they're going to try every legislative means they can find to ameliorate the effects of this law. So it is only England. It's the UK government, it's the English government, it's the Conservatives that are doing this. And what about the fight back? Well, I've been on a few protests recently myself. It's the Kill the Bill protest, because as we know, these anti-trespass laws are tied up with the laws against freedom of speech and protest, the right to free assembly. And it's heartening to see that all the big groups like Stand Up to Racism and Extinction Rebellion are not forgetting about this bit of the law. And I've seen many like signs and banners from non-Gypsy traveller people supporting Gypsy and traveller rights as part of the fight back against this bill. There's also going to be a legal fight back. As soon as it comes into law, there are a top team of lawyers and barristers that are going to fight the anti-trespass bit and challenge it in the courts using equalities laws, human rights laws. And, there's also stuff like even the National Council of Police Chiefs, who put in a submission to the consultation on this anti-trespass bill saying, we don't want this. We don't want this. We've got enough powers. Even they are seeking to lobby the government to give some kind of guidance to police service, how they can, how this bill actually works on the ground. But they're not getting their calls returned. Isn't that amazing? The organisation that represents the chief police officers in this country are not getting their calls returned from the Home Secretary. But we're going to fight this to the bitter end. As I said before, there's an 80-seat majority, but this law can't go through. And if it does, it will be challenged in the courts. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It's it's definitely a very concerning issue. It is good to see people turning out to protest against it. It's unfortunate it's happening at a time of COVID restriction. Otherwise, I think the demonstration would be much bigger. But thanks for that contribution, Mike. We're going to now ask Deaine Lebas to talk. Damian's a writer from Sussex. His first book, The Stopping Places, A Journey Through Gypsy Britain, looked at Britain's Romany past from the perspective of years spent living on the road in a full transit van. It won the Somerset Morn Award, a Jerwood Award, with BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week, and shortlisted for the Stanford Travel Book of the Year. And I can attest, having read the book, I can attest what a great read it is, and for me, a very illuminating read as well. So I highly recommend it. Damian also recently presented a film about Gypsy history on the BBC, which is also brilliant. He's been editor of Traveller's Times and is widely published as a poet and a journalist, and is currently working on a book about Atlantis. So Damian, over to you.
Can you hear me, everyone? Okay, thanks, Chris and Trudy and everyone else for having us. Howbeit we're talking about something, as I'm sure you were already aware and have no doubt gleaned even more from what Mike's just said, is deeply alarming. I thought I'd just, by way of beginning, tie in what I intend to speak briefly about with Deaine, my mum, and Mike's presentations. So those short films which Deaine showed, which I haven't seen for a few years, I edited those together with footage that Deaine shot in various parts of the country. It's quite interesting watching them again, because at the time I thought, why can I not help making these films which begin beautifully and then tend to take a sort of disturbing turn where the music becomes darker, having started quite jolly, or the sky, which began as a sort of nice canopy over the world, becomes a kind of threat. And I think really that's explained by the nature of gypsy and traveller history, but also really all nomadic history in the developed and developing world. It seems to be defined by a sort of cycle of things moving from sort of toleration at best to outright persecution at worst, which is often the norm in certain places. And then in terms of Mike's presentation, much of what I'm about to say is connected to the points that Mike was making there. I'm not legally qualified and I'm not a legal professional, but I think it's fair to say that there are analogies between what this legislation is intending to do and the so-called sus laws, which were operative in the 1980s, and really provoked major civil unrest, quite understandably, in various cities, most famously in South London. But this is where the mere suspicion of intent to do something becomes a criminal offence, becomes reason for a officer of the law to brutalise and indeed incarcerate you. And it's not only shocking that this was a fundamental part of the government's manifesto by which it came to be elected to office, but also that we seem to be looking, because of the 80-seat majority, as Mike said, at seeing this brought into law, and in spite of the fact that lawyers acting with the interests of gypsies and travellers and of course all of us at heart, recently defeated, by way of a High Court challenge, the sort of local version of this, which are the injunctions against persons unknown, which were taken out by various boroughs and local areas across the country. One of which I wrote about in this book was in Harlow in Essex, where there was an injunction against named members of the Irish traveller community who were seen to be causing a public nuisance by stopping in the area, but also against persons unknown, i.e. anybody else stopping there with intent to reside. So that was kind of a pilot, if you like, of this law, and it was resoundingly defeated in the High Court because it breaks every equalities law, more or less, that there is. So we have a Home Secretary in a government that doesn't really seem to care about that and is on a quest, really, if you like, echoing the behaviour of previous governments. The coalition government, one of its first acts in office in 2010 was to revoke the Gypsy and Traveller sites refurbishment budget, as though that was kind of the main national priority, when it was a trifling amount of money by any standards when you're looking at the national budget. Anyway, the reason I'm holding this isn't because I wrote it and I'd like you to buy it, even though those things might sort of crassly be the case. It's because I was traveling around doing the kind of primary research, if you like, behind this book in 2015 to 16, which is comparatively recently. It's just a few years ago, 5 or 6 years. But the contents of this book soon might as well really have been written in the 1960s, you know, notwithstanding references to the internet and certain other trappings of the modern age. I mean, it will be kind of an historical artifact of a book, because we've never been in a situation before where the sort of traveling that I was doing in here has been directly criminalized. I write in this book about the criminalization of being a wandering Egyptian, which is the sort of florid, slightly ridiculous Tudor way of referring to a Romany person. Egyptian was a misnomer based on the belief that Romany people came from Egypt. But if you like, I mean, this is kind of dark humor in a way, which I'm forced to resort to, but at least those laws were only targeted at gypsies who could be hanged or deported for being a wandering Egyptian, or in some cases, people who consorted with or were sort of friendly with them became guilty of accusations of sorcery and witchcraft by association. So it wasn't wise to befriend a gypsy in 16th and 17th century England. But what we're looking at now is a law which really, as Mike pointed out, could conceivably be aimed at anyone whom a police officer thinks is an undesirable. Because the intent to reside, if you think about how nebulous that is, it doesn't require proving. It simply requires assertion from someone in the appropriate authority. And if you don't find that disturbing, there's something wrong with you, but I presume you all do, so that's good. I mean, this is a very brief sort of talk, if you like, but I thought about calling it, when I got this request, hedging and ditching, because hedging and ditching was something that my family used to do in the past. It was a typical gypsy and traveller occupation in the countryside, as it was a typical occupation of rural mobile labourers from all backgrounds and the rural poor. And the reason I find that interesting is because if you think about what hedging and ditching is, it's maintaining boundaries, it's maintaining hedgerows, traditional sort of divides between here and there, between this person's land, that person's land, between the public highway and agricultural land. Ditch clearing is maintaining drainage. If you like, fancifully, it's maintaining the arteries of the countryside. And the reason I'm saying all this is because there is an obvious divide there between the quotation which came at the end of one of Delaney's short films from George Borrow in his book Lavengro, where he puts into the mouth of the gypsy Ambrose Smith the line about the wind on the heath. And if I could, there's also a wind on the heath, and if I could only feel that, I would gladly live forever. I've always found that interesting because all the old Romany people in my family can't stand the wind. And the wind is seen as an agent of chaos and evil when you're trying to set up camp. Why am I going on about the wind versus hedging and ditching? It's because there's a divide, a sort of strange, I don't want to use the word schizophrenia, but that's almost the most appropriate word. There's a sort of mental dissonance that exists in the conception of gypsies and travellers between the idea of the wind, which I would say sums up the kind of romantic attitude, and the idea of the earth, which is really the reality. So you have this idea that people are sort of blown along by the wind, the romantic nomad, the kind of Fleetwood Mac idea of the footloose gypsy with flowers on the floor and stuff, versus people who actually work the earth, are from the land, the same as everybody else, and did jobs like stone picking up and potato picking up. So you know, land clearance and growing the food for the nation. And I find that this is an interesting antipathy, which once you start looking at it, you see it everywhere. And it's used to discredit the idea that gypsies and other nomadic people belong even in the land where they are born. Also, just to take that idea a step further, if thinking about the idea of entrenchment versus wafting in, if you like, you have the fact that gypsies and travellers have always fought in the armed forces for every war that's occurred since they've been a noted presence in the country. So in terms of what do I hear now when I hear those bells tolling in that film about the Bolton Whitmanites and the Winter Hill trespass that was shown earlier on, I hear the sort of eternal bells endlessly tolling for public access to land. And I'm not sure how well it bodes. Hopefully the challenges Mike talks about will be successful. If not, what worries me is we have a Home Secretary who's really on a crusade, who seems to believe that by passing acts of government, you can remove nomadism, that it can sort of be deleted by a legal fiat. And every time that's happened in the past, that has not been the consequence, but what has occurred has been violence and bloodshed. So Adolf Hitler, for instance, who had more resources and the machinery of wickedness at his disposal than the Home Secretary does, failed to eliminate gypsies and travellers from continental Europe, but tried his best with the result of hundreds of thousands of deaths and chaos. In this country, I don't see that occurring, but there are alarming signs already of what might occur. And I think this is probably why the police, who were surveyed by Friends, Families and Travellers, the Gypsy and Traveller NGO that operates out of Brighton, found that a majority of police forces, as Mike said, weren't in favour of this legislation. And I think there are many reasons for that. One of them is that I can't see where they have the capacity to impound vehicles. There's a whole infrastructure required there, as we've seen with sort of the customs thing, the unfolding chaos there connected to Brexit. But also the idea that this is kind of pouring petrol on community tensions rather than easing them in the ways Mike alluded to, like the negotiated stopping that's been trialled quite successfully up in York, where there's liaison between the local council, the police and travellers, and they sort of just agree to stay in a certain area for a certain amount of time and not cause a nuisance, etc. This is the exact opposite. And I won't name the place because I don't want to incriminate anyone, but recently I went to a place where I used to stop in my van, and a group of travellers had moved on to a green space, but they'd actually chainsawed out some wooden bollards in order to pull on there. Now, I've never seen this kind of behaviour before from these people, and I can't help but suspect that it's because it's a sort of aggression in response to aggression, which is exactly the sort of thing that we don't want to see. That's an interesting spot anyway, and I'll finish soon on this note. But as Mike was saying, we have this van life movement, which is really a sort of two-sided coin, I think. On the one hand, there's the kind of van lifestyle, a sort of affluent, you know, I want to go on the road in order to express myself, kind of, and convert my van at considerable expense to myself, and it'll be nice, and sort of almost akin to the sort of the sort of wealthier Cornish surfer sort of vibe on the one hand. And then on the other side, we have people who are living in their vehicles really because they can't afford commercial rent. And it's not always that easy to distinguish between the two. And the law, in fact, can't really distinguish between the two. So at that spot I talked about where the bollards were chainsawed out recently, a local bylaw was enacted banning motor caravans overnight. What's a motor caravan? I mean, that I presume that what they meant was motorhomes, but I think that the word motorhome is quite emotive because it's an aspirational. Well, I mean, all these words are emotive, but for the core Conservative vote, perhaps it's more emotive to think of the motorhome, which is something that one aspires to acquire and then use to go on holiday during retirement. So you can see what a mess this is going to make, and how ill-equipped the police are to deal with it. Although I expect that these powers will be used by the police, because the police do tend to use new powers when they're given them, as they did with the 1994 Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. So I'll wrap things up there. I was going to read a little bit from my book, but I'll probably run out of time. Really, what we're seeing here, I think, is if you think about medieval England, because as Mike said, we're really talking about England when it comes to this law, you had harsh punishments enacted on the human body because the political body, the body politic, was weak and it knew it was weak. And that's when you get a government that wants to make an example of individuals. So back then they were hanging, drawing and quartering people. This will be the seizure of people's mobile homes, which in many cases is sort of all they've got. But really, I don't see a substantial difference between the act of a 15th century autocrat and the current Home Secretary. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Damian. I'm just going to, a couple of messages that Mike's put in the chat, clarify a couple of things. Mike says a horse-drawn cart counts as a vehicle under the new law, which is interesting, bearing in mind what Damien's just said. He's also put a link in to an article in Traveller's Times on negotiated stopping. Chris Jones has put in a piece just pointing out there's a demo against the laws on Saturday 1st of May at 4 p.m. in Manchester, St. Peter's Square. And Kevin points out there's also one Saturday at 1 p.m. But Kevin, you would you let us know where that is, please? So that's excellent news. There's stuff going on. Now, I believe Lynne is with us. She's managed to get in. Can you hear me, Lynne? No. Yeah. Lynne, you need to unmute. She's almost with us. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Lynne. Hang on, I've lost you. Let me come back over this page. I can't actually see you, Lynne, but
I'm going to try the video thing as well.
Yeah, can you get your video on? Well, I'll introduce Lynne while she's
to access camera.
Yeah.
Zoom to access your camera. Okay. Does that work?
Not yet.
I'll keep going.
Yeah, I'll just do your introduction while you're fiddling with that, Lynne.
Okay.
Lynne has been part of the new European New Traveller movement with numerous links to the GRT community for 30 years. Having fought both roadside evictions and Article 4 legislation on land owned by travellers, she was well versed in the challenges her community faces. Lynne is currently secretary for both the Friends of the Horse-Drawn campaign and No Fixed Abode Travellers, whose Facebook pages reflect her community and provide regular updates on campaigns to challenge this criminal trespass law and to seek to improve the image of travellers. Now, Lynne, we still can't see you, Lynne. Lynne is, I believe, understands the ins and outs of this law and the likely implications for the broader community. Lynne, we can't see you, but if you want to start talking, please do. Are you on a laptop, Lynne?
I was on a laptop, but for some reason I've come back home, my laptop's not working. So I'm on my phone now. So I've managed to download Zoom.
Yeah. So
and it's telling me to go on to
somewhere on your phone, there'll be a little symbol indicating video.
There is, but then I keep pressing that and then it says that I need to actually go back into settings and read settings, which I'm trying to do now.
Okay, we'll just let you fiddle for a bit. Well, just Kevin, if you can hear me, can you give us details of that demo at 1 o'clock on Saturday, please?
It's 1 p.m. Piccadilly Gardens.
Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester.
Fill the bill. Yeah.
Thank you.
Settings.
What else? So,
Oh yeah, put it in there. Yeah. Go up a little bit. Yeah, I don't. Chris Jones just put in the chat that the Appleby Horse Fair has been put back to August under a COVID-related deal. Could this cause tensions as people move to the area for the annual event? Damian, do you want to comment on that while we're waiting for Lynne?
Well, I don't know what to say about that. I only found out about this today. Appleby Horse Fair traditionally takes place early in June, with the main fair day being the first Saturday. So people are very used to that being when it happens. And in fact, you know, in some cases, dozens of generations of their family will have appeared in Appleby at that point in the year. So I suspect that old habits dying hard as they do, there might be those who intend to go then. Having said that, we're lucky, you know, I think we're fortunate that to have someone like Billy Welch, who is such a kind of point of contact between gypsies and travellers, who has their respect, works with the local council, works with the local constabulary, and that most people will just be happy that it's happening at all and will go there in August. I wouldn't expect significant tensions, to be honest. Can't hear you, Chris, I'm afraid.
I'd like to come in into that as well.
Right, Lynne's with us now. Great.
All right,
Yeah.
right, cool.
Okay, Lynne, I've just given you a intro about your background and where you're coming from, and
Okay.
I'm going to hand it over to you now to talk about your experiences and where you think this whole business is going.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I was hoping to hear what you all had to say before I said anything, particularly. But unfortunately, I've joined quite late due to a technical problem. So I do apologise. So I really have no bearings in this other than hearing the last 5 minutes of the previous speaker, who pretty much summed up, well, not summed up, went through a large array of difficulties that we face, and all the and also summed up all the attributes we have in the travelling community as well. So I think that what I want to do now is hopefully paint a more of a positive example of what we as the new travellers are trying to do. One of the things that we're trying to do to paint a more positive, more accurate picture of us as travellers within the whole history of the travelling movement, going right the way back to the 1300s, in fact. And I thought I would just read you out. I hope you don't mind me reading it out. The application we've got for a research and development grant for a travelling play, if that's okay. So this is something that we're hoping to go ahead with, and it's a history or a herstory of the common people and the commons of the British Isles, including our land. We've all been taught the history of the kings and queens at school, but rarely is the history of the common people being taught. As the UK is now preparing to teach our youth about the horrors of our colonialistic past after Black Lives Matter, our play wants to embed this scene into the roots of our past, where these atrocities were originally enacted upon our own people here in the British Isles. As the capitalist model expands, it requires new lands and commodities to feed it into its growth. But human and planetary resources are finite, and so ever new conquests are required. It's the function of this play to tell this cautionary tale and provide a glimpse of a different way primarily envisaged by our community, Research and development is required to write a skeletal play with the writer, and builds upon what we have already presented before within our own social circles, such as in the green campaigns of the Green Gathering. However, we are now examining how we might take this to a wider audience. We feel this is imperative to tell our story. Within a democracy, the masses can affect the minorities. We hope the play will inform the wider public, counteracting what we believe is a relentless drive by the British tabloid press towards demonising our culture, coupled with institutional racism against Indigenous travellers, GRT, and the nomadic way of life. In the face of the possibility of even losing our rights to peaceful protest and direct action, this type of creative endeavour is a way of direct acting and would be less likely to be suppressed and more likely to produce positive results, we think. The play will be in the form of an old mummers play, where audience participation is paramount and the stage is dismantled. This is commoners acting with commoners. We envisage the audience to be encouraged to carry props, sport quick access costumes, and deliver the odd line in the play. We hope to tailor each show to the locality within which the play runs, drawing upon local historical examples of uprising for land rights. In this way, we hope to work closely with museums. One of the R&D outcomes will be to approach the museums to consider whether we can liaise with them in this fashion, maybe presenting the play around their locations, as well as on village greens and urban shopping centres. Wherever we take our play, we will have a team who will engage with the local Women's Institute and local historians. We also want to further our excellent links with associations which already represent land rights, such as the Open Space Society, and expand to others with similar emphasis, such as Plant Life's Verges campaign and the Ramblers Association, with a specific view to representing a scene in our play based around the protest at Kinder Scout, which I know is why Mike Doherty got me to speak at your event today. We also want to run our play alongside a travelling exhibition of photographic imagery with Romany John Doe and Oxford University Archives photographer John Gibbons. We may call the play Forgive Us Our Trespasses. It will be presented in an evolving style reflecting the journey of land rights battles through the ages, culminating with its relevance today. Hence, the beginnings of the play will be in a Shakespearean type prose and be similar in passion and ironic humour to Midsummer Night's Dream. We will suggest to the writer that the human activities will be seen through the eyes of animals, perhaps, the horse being a possible narrator. We hope to use the R&D to explore the construction of magnificent costumes, notably to reflect the interplay between the seasons and the old pagan values of the winter and the summer king. As paganism is the most rapidly expanding religion in the UK, surpassing church attendance, we feel we might approach the churches to promote this theme. And of course, the Christian pilgrims who, under the impending Criminal Trespass Act, would not have the freedom to roam. The town of Glastonbury would feature strongly here as our country's centre for pilgrimage. We will draw upon the strong forging of links that has already occurred in the town of late between the modern church and its pagan roots. In this way, the play will not only help to break the racism we as a community suffer, but will also benefit wider society by providing them with a sorely needed spiritual context. The R&D will delimit the cost of this production and include pricing a project manager, actors, stage crew, writer and musicians. And we hope to draw upon these members for our community where excellence exists to inject much needed income into what is one of the most deprived cultures in our society. The R&D will cost the hiring of a rig from our affiliated group, NFAT, to transport the crew, costumes and exhibitions and provide a hub for outreach to interested parties. There. That's what we're proposing to do, which is quite a positive way to break down the barriers that we see existing between us and the wider population. And I hope you agree that that's needed.
Thanks, Lynn. That's great. Yeah. Would you like Lynn, just to, because for us who are not as part of the GRT community. Some of the Gypsy Roma traveller terminology kind of it may be not as obvious to us as it may be to yourself. So how does, you know, you class as a new age traveller, how does that differ, and what are the origins of that? Do you want to just speak about that for a moment, just to?
Yeah, could you just tell me the name of the previous the chap that came on previously? What was his name?
Damian.
Damian. Yeah, he mentioned travellers working in on fields as part of the agricultural system, and that's where I first came across GRT in my own hometown of Birmingham, and there were a group of people that every year went off into the countryside, and they introduced me to organic. That there was a farm that we were picking on, organic farm, and also we were picking strawberries and doing the hop picking, and that's been a tradition in the traveller community for forever, and I think these types of routes need to be emphasised. But I think that when the new travellers came along, we weren't new at all. We were in a sort of fashion icon way new, but I think that travellers have always been here in the land, in England, and they're not necessarily from a Gypsy, Romany, traditional Irish traveller sort of background. They can be from anybody that travels from A to B. I know in my family we've got roots going back through the ages where we were commuting from Chichester to London quite regularly in our families. So what the play wants to emphasise is that we are embedded within our land, and to say that there are different ethnic groups within the traveller community, but there are people that have always travelled within our own community, and obviously the agricultural community has relied on us to a great extent up until the last 30, 20 years, where we've been replaced by an influx of people from Europe. But then that's travelling, isn't it?
Sure. And I remember my parents, certainly when we lived in London, in South London, and it was a regular event for them to go down to Kent to pick hops.
There you go.
In the 30s and probably the 40s too. I have at least one person is dying to see your play. I hope it come to fruition. It sounds really interesting, Anna says. I've got a message from George. Asks this. We're kind of moving. Lynne, thanks for that. I think we seem to be getting quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to move into the Q&A, and I'm just going to relay a few questions. From George says, could one of the speakers say something about how COVID has affected GRT communities and how much support, etc., these communities have received? I don't know who. Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, like Travellers Times has done quite a bit. Like we've done videos on COVID, the different regulations that have come in. It's if you're talking about a small, a traveller site with mixed generations, like you've got 3 or 4 generations living on a site. I mean, COVID is quite a danger, and we've the Travellers Times has tried to highlight that what is going on, and just like any other people in this country, there are people that are denying that this is happening. And we were funded by the Welsh government to put out a special magazine to Gypsy and traveller sites in Wales, just highlighting what COVID is and what the regulations were. and how to keep yourself safe from it. And we've had, you know, pretty prominent community spokespeople like Billy Welsh, Josie O'Driscoll, that are encouraging or gypsies and travellers to take COVID seriously, and if necessary, get the vaccination. So, yeah. If you held a gun against my head, I think gypsy and traveller people have been taking COVID seriously, and you know, taking the necessary precautions, and the Travellers Times has been part of that.
Good, thanks, Mike.
I mean, I could append very quickly to that
yeah.
COVID, unlike your average cabinet minister, doesn't care if you're a traveller or what you are. But alas, gypsies and travellers do tend to have worse health. So respiratory diseases are very common. There's a much higher than the national average smoking rate. Diabetes is a more, you know, there's much higher incidence of that. So as a result, certain families have been perhaps disproportionately affected for those reasons, which you could or could not say is because they're gypsies or travellers, you know. But in our extended family, there have been many hospitalisations and several deaths, but then that's true of many extended families of all backgrounds all over the country.
Thanks, Damian. Yeah. Mike also put in the chat, going back to this question about the different communities, he said when Romany gypsies first reached England, they joined and mixed with an already existing nomadic community. Check out Professor Becky Taylor's Social Histories of Travellers. That's in the chat.
I mean, perhaps can I say a little bit about that quickly? So the term GRT, Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, as far as I can tell, was a British Department for Education sort of abbreviation for the sake of departmental convenience, that would then weirdly was absorbed by most supranational European organizations, including the Council of Europe and later the European Union, and it's become a commonly used way of referring to really everyone who is sort of seen socially as being a gypsy or traveller, I think. I mean, if you break it down into its constituent parts, what the British government probably meant by it was G for gypsies, i.e. British Romany gypsies, the largest of the traditionally nomadic minority groups. Roma, meaning Roma, as it should be pronounced, recently immigrant Romany communities from the continent, and travellers, which would be the hardest one to unpick, probably meaning travellers of Celtic heritage, Scottish and Irish travellers, being the most sort of conspicuous group in England, but also probably new travellers as well. So yeah, a strange, cumbersome catch-all term that was never used by the people that it's describing themselves. And as Mike has pointed out in the chat, really, when it comes to the history of these groups, the difference is the extent to which they've been fetishized by intellectuals. And it tends to be Romany people, and to a lesser extent, the Celtic travellers, who've been more fetishized by British intellectuals. And that's for various reasons, because of a sort of inward-looking mentality, which made it a sort of social game to try and penetrate that culture. And that's a sort of semi-intentional choice of a nasty word, because often these intellectuals were also trying to sleep with gypsy and traveller girls and young men as well. So there's a weird history there, but also it's because of language. So a lot of these intellectuals were obsessed with the languages of gypsies and travellers. So the Romany language being one of them. Mandy's a Romany Rockoromaski, Romany Chow, Katoro Southeski, Kotoro the Bori, Gorgicano Tem. I'm a Romany speaking gypsy from the southern part of Great Britain. That's a sort of florid example of my native language. But even in that, and this goes back to Mike's point, in our language, there are many examples of what used to be called thieves' cant, or the language of the canting crew or the sturdy beggars. And this is a sort of very elusive but frequently referred to historical phenomenon of people of various ethnicities, but typically British or from the British Isles by birth, who were seen as sort of wandering vagabonds, untrustworthy types who did various things for a living, but were called sturdy beggars because they weren't part of the deserving poor, like a crippled war veteran or somebody with, who was elderly or had a lifelong illness. They were just sort of conniving, mobile types. So, I mean, how complicated do you want that picture to be? No matter how complicated I try and make it sound, it's more complicated.
Thanks, Damian. We've had a request from Stuart. He said if you were planning to read a little section from your book, we'd love to hear it, and I agree. So if you want to prepare a little reading, perhaps we'll finish on that while we deal with a few more questions.
Even though I've just gone off on one for...
Yeah, that's fine. And Mike, you commented that you'd spoken to Billy Welch at Appleby. I mean, I think on this negotiated, encampments. Do you want to just enlarge on that? You're getting back to the, the issue, the question you've had about Appleby Horse Fair.
All right. Well, I'll start and then Damian can finish on his reading, I think. So I think that'd be a good end point for this. Billy Welsh he's a Sheraron. It kind of translates as head gypsy. It doesn't mean he's the head gypsy. He's just a head gypsy. And his family have been working with Appleby for generations. He took the mantle on from his own dad, who took the mantle on from his dad. Now, Appleby's a bit of a weird event. It's not like Glastonbury. What it is that lots of farmers rent out fields on a certain day of the year, and 40,000, up to 40,000 people, lots of gypsies and travellers, but not only gypsies and travellers, turn up. So there's no event that the police or council can cancel. It would be like cancelling Bognor Beach on a bank holiday August. They can't cancel it. The coordinators, because they don't like to be called organisers of Appleby Fair, which includes gypsy and traveller representatives and the police and the local police and local councils, got together and decided that Appleby couldn't go ahead during COVID. And in fact, Billy Welsh this is public. I'm not sharing information that he doesn't want to share. The sheriff has had COVID. It's not very nice. He said it's not very nice, and he urged everyone to get the jab. And they decided, the coordinators decided not to have the fair on its usual date. So this year it's going ahead in August for that reason. So everyone is safe, or we hope, who knows what's going to happen. But by then restrictions will be lifted and it'll be smoother. And that's why the fair's been put back. Now, as for people traveling to the fair, and people travel on some gypsies and travellers travel in their horse-drawn wagons to the fair, and they take 2 or 3 weeks to get there. Some put their horses in a horse box, and their trailers, their Vardos on a trailer, and drive there in a couple of days. Some go by train and then get a taxi from the train station. As for the people traveling there, the law won't be in by then. so it's not going to affect them. But typically, the councils and the police of Cumbria tend to put aside negotiated stopping places where people travelling to the fair can stop on their way. And that's a solution that could be rolled out across the whole country. Negotiated stopping places, opening up old places like Scotland, where travellers used to stop, taking away the big concrete blocks. Councils have loads of areas of land where travellers can stop. They just need to open them up. And then maybe you wouldn't get so many of these really visible encampments on playing fields.
Thanks, Mike. That's Mosey has raised a question, and she's concerned about fairground travellers. Bolton traditionally has been a winter home for fairground travellers, and she's worried how this is going to affect them. Does anyone want to contribute? Mike, is that your area, or Lynn, whoever? Is it something we can just say about?
Well, the next thing we do, we can get a fairground traveller or showman along, but they've had a hard year as well. Like they're, showmen have had an awful year because of COVID. Their main source of income has been wiped out, and some of the fairs are just starting to open up. But yeah, it's like the events industry. It's like all that kind of industry. Like they've had a hard year. But councils tend to have stopping places for showmen. Not all the time, and you've got to get to the stopping places. But the law will, well, if they pull up on anywhere that isn't designated by the council, it will affect them as well.
Kevin says there's 2 showman locations in Bolton, so there's quite a tradition of that around here. And as a teacher, I mean, I knew taught many of the children of the show people. Yeah. Thanks for that, Damon. I'm gonna ask you to finish up with a reading from your book, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll just thank before you do your reading, then I'll do the thanks. That'd be
it's
great.
Very short, but earlier on I mentioned. Can I share my screen very quickly? How do I do that?
You should, if you go to the green button at the bottom, I think you should be able to do it. Yeah, you should be able.
It's asking me to do all kinds of permissions. Earlier on, I mentioned a place near here where a group of travellers, alas, had chainsawed out some wooden bollards that were expressly put there to prevent people from pulling on a green area. And I sat there for a while staring at where these bollards used to be. And I was caught in 2 minds, because it is obviously an act of vandalism on something that's been put there supposedly for a public good, to preserve the area for other activities. But also I was thinking about how the stopping places have been systematically taken away, and how that, combined with the Home Secretary reveling in the enactment of this law, which is to come. And I was going to show you an image that she put on Facebook of what to me is a typical open-sided common, a sort of glorious potential stopping place, sort of crowing over this police crime sentencing in courts bill. And it made me sick, really, to see an image of the land which has been taken from the people being used to celebrate that fact. I mean, I could go on all night, but this is a quick. This is sort of maybe from. This is me trying to convey, I suppose, from a traveller's perspective, a bit what it's like going back to a place where your family used to live and finding out that it's been rendered inaccessible to anyone with a mobile living space. As the sun goes down, I trundle along towards Shaldon Green, the last Achintan I find. Lined on one side by a very old-looking flint wall covered in dark moss. Nan was born here in January 1927 in a Reading wagon caught in a snowdrift. The doctor walked miles from the little town of Alton to deliver Nan. He said to me, "Dad, you got a baby girl, now make me a nice cup of tea," as she always says. A rare, happy memory from a time when a winter birth often meant the death of a traveller child. I can't be sure that I've found the right place, but it seems as though it ought to be here. A ditch about 2 feet deep has been dug around the perimeter, between the verge and what is now the brambled ground where I suspect the wagons used to stand. A height restrictor, pikey barriers I've heard them called, overhangs the way in. Most of the Achintans, the stopping places, look like this now. Restricted access used for nearly nothing. Fastened against the people who, for many generations, had made them their occasional homes, where fires once burned and people tap danced and sang. To my surprise, the stopping place is now home to a single Highland cow, massive, long-horned and orange. It's so far south of its native habitat, I see it as an omen, though its meaning is unclear. It stares at me across the ditch as it stoically chews the cud. I stare back and take some photos as the sky begins to lower, darkening, spoiling my pictures. Static is palpable in the sky. As I get back in the van, I notice a sign on a fence post. Your dog could be shot if found amongst livestock.
Thanks, Damian. Kevin's just posted, is there a takeaway action we can have from this meeting? And I guess one thing we do is make sure we sign every petition we come across and contact our MPs and representatives on the council. Kevin, I don't know if you've got any other firm plans that you had in mind that you just want to mention briefly.
Yeah, if I can. I mean, already the trade union movement are completely opposed to this. We're making sure that the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community are not forgotten in any of that legislation. So that's the important part. We had somebody speaking at our trades council most recently, which is kind of really good. Legal observers as well, we're all gearing up to kind of support these actions. So I guess it's watch this space. I spoke to Yasmin very early on when Priti Patel first mentioned this batshit idea of hers in 2019. So there's, you know, that we have an ally there, but not necessarily an ally in other parts of Bolton, I think. So.
Okay, yeah. Yasmin Qureshi, but is our MP for Bolton South West?
Southeast, yeah.
Southeast, yeah. Yeah.
That's the constituency that also has the Gypsy site.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So look, thank you so much, Deaine and Mike and Damian and Lynne for joining us tonight. It's been absolutely illuminating. It's been great listening to you, and it's great to meet up again, Deaine. And of course, you're welcome to join us on September the 5th when we march up to Winter Hill to celebrate this event in 1896. So thank you all so much. I'm sure everyone's appreciated.
Thank you. It's been absolutely informative and fascinating. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's keep in touch, and we'll see you all soon, hope maybe.
Yeah, take care. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.